Have you ever dreamed about being an attack helicopter? Well, with this Hildryn Balefire build, that is exactly what you're gonna become. Basically a AH-64 Apache hovering above the ground, shooting any enemies down below, exploding anything that comes into range. This build lets you deal huge amount of AoE damage by combining the Balefire with her Aegis Storm, turning Hildryn into a flying nuke that just deletes enemies in seconds. And honestly, it feels like this build was made for open large-scale maps in Warframe, because anything you see is getting destroyed in mere seconds with the Balefire Hildryn setup. So what's up, I'm Tipsy and this is my first build video for Warframe. In this video we will be going over 3 different versions of the build, so no matter where you are in the game, you should be able to put together a working version of the Hildryn Balefire build. With that said, let's just get right into it. So this build is a Hildryn Aegis Balefire build that focuses on stacking high amounts of shield and range and ability strength, basically turning Hildryn into a flying nuke that fires heavy hitting explosive shots. When playing with this build, you will mainly be using the 4th ability, Aegis Storm, which puts Hildryn into a hovering state, while in this mode you will use your Balefire Alt Fire mode to shoot out multiple explosive shots that will clear enemies extremely fast in any range. At the same time, you want to keep casting pillage to keep your shield topped off, since shields are Hildryn's main source of energy. So the gameplay loop is very simple. You'll just have to fly around, alt fire your Balefire and tap your second ability every so often, so you absolutely deletes enemies, armor stripping enemies around you and killing them with high explosive damage. Because of that, the main stat priorities for this build is going to be the shield, the range and strength. That is basically all you have to focus on in this build. The shields are extremely important on Hildryn because they basically replace her energy. The more max shield you have and shield regeneration you have, the longer you can stay in the Aegis Storm and keep your AoE damaging nuke up and going. On top of that, there's the Aegis Gale augment mods that will make your Balefire deal 15% of your max shield as bonus damage, which is why stacking shields directly increases your damage overall, and we will be using this mod as basically the prime part of the whole build. Next we build range, because both Balefire and Aegis Storm scales with it. More range means bigger explosive radius on the Balefire and larger AoE around you while you're hovering around, making it much easier to clear groups of enemies around you. Finally we build strength to basically boost the damage of the Balefire and the Aegis Storm, pushing the build's overall damage high enough to comfortably deal with high level enemies. And to make this build work, probably there is a few things that will help, but only one mod is actually required, and that is the Aegis Gale augment, which is what we really need for the build to actually function. This mod will change how your Balefire works while you're actually in your Aegis Storm mode. Instead of having to charge your shots, you can use the alt fire to shoot out multiple explosive blasts, letting you deal huge amount of AoE damage while hovering around. Because of that, the Aegis Gale is mandatory for this build, and without it the playstyle just doesn't really work the same way, as you can't use the explosive shots in the same corner. And you can get this mod from the Parent Sequence or the Cephalon Suda for 25,000 standing, or you can trade it from another player. And the second thing is, I highly recommend trying to get a Raksa Kubrow, and this companion actually has access to a mod called Protect, which will help you restore and add an extra bit of extra shield and regeneration, making it much easier to stay in your Aegis Storm mode for longer with this build. The Raksa Kubrow isn't required, but if you want to make the build more comfortable and consistent, especially in the higher level content, it really helps having a shield companion, which will basically allow you to regen your shields. And before we do jump into the builds themselves, I highly recommend watching all of the 3 versions, as the endgame version is where I explain most of the core mechanics and why the build works, while the budget and early versions focuses more on what changes and how you can make it work and make your way up from there. So this is the current build I use for my Hildryn, and it can absolutely destroy Steel Path content. One downside to mention is that it doesn't really work in arbitration, since the Balefire mode actually don't hit the drones in those missions, but for basically anything else Steel Path related, this build works extremely well, as you can see here. Overall, this version of the build is a bit on the expensive side, sitting around 11 FOMA in total for how I have built this Hildryn. While Hildryn herself only requires 1 FOMA, the Balefire takes around 6 FOMA and the Raksa Kubrow actually takes in around 4 FOMA. If that is too much investment, don't worry, we will go over the budget version and the early game version as well later on in this video. For Hildryn, your build will be looking something like this. We will also be using Siren's Molt subsumed ability here, mainly because it will give us some simple movement speed multiplier, which will help us a lot when moving around in the Aegis Storm while hovering through the missions, as this hovering mode is actually not that fast and can be kind of annoying, so the main way to actually traverse around is going to be dodging around. The most important mods in this build are the Borrel's Hatred, Aegis Gale and Precision Intensify. Borrel's Hatred will give you extra shield capacity, but more importantly it will also reduce the damage you take while airborne, and since while we are airborne respawn most of the time with this build that works perfectly, and taking less damage will also mean you have more shields to actually use your abilities on. Then we have the Aegis Gale, which is what actually makes the build work and function, allowing us to use the Balefire Fire mode in the Aegis Storm mode and adding 15% of our max shield as bonus damage, which scales directly with our shield investment. Then we have the Precision Intensify, which is used because we are in the Aegis Storm mode almost all the time, letting us get a large strength bonus specifically on our 4th ability, the Aegis mode. Instead of shredding strength across all of our abilities we are barely using, so we are just mainly focusing on the 4th ability. For the Arcanes, which are very important as well, we are running the Arcane Velocity and Arcane Expertise. Arcane Velocity gives us a bonus fire rate to pistols on critical hits, which also applies to Balefire, letting us actually shoot much faster and clear enemies more efficiently. While the Arcane Expertise boosts our max shield based on our ability strength, which gives us even more survivability and more damage thanks to how the Aegis Gale scales with our shields actually. So overall this build is fairly simple on the Hildryn side, and now for the Balefire Charger, the build focuses mainly on raw damage and multi-shot. Normally you want to have crit chance here to constantly trigger the Arcane Velocity, but instead we are using the secondary Innovate, which actually builds around crit chance on hit until we reach 5 stacks, and this allows us to keep our Arcane Velocity active and make the weapon feel much more smoother to use, and without taking any mod slots up on actually getting crit chance on the build. Overall the Balefire build is pretty simple, just damage modifiers with corrosive and heat added on top, but it synergizes extremely well with the Hildryn setup we have made. Then next up we have the Raksa Kubrow, which acts as a supporting unit companion for this build. The focus here is on shield support and synergizing mods, that the most important mods are gonna be the Protect and the Bond mods. The Protect mod will help you recharge your shield and add some passive shield regeneration, which makes it easier to stay in the Aegis Storm for longer periods of time. The Seismic Bond gives us extra ability efficiency while using a channeled ability, such as actually using our Aegis Storm. As long as our companion is dealing damage, this helps offset the shield cost of staying in the Aegis Storm and firing the Balefire. Then we have Tenacious Bond mod, which actually reduces the companion's recovery time, and if you mod the Kubrow claws to actually reach over 50% crit chance, you'll also gain a 1.2x final crit chance damage multiplier, which is a nice little damage boost for our build. Finally we have Reinforced Bond, which gives us a free fire rate bonus as long as we have over 1200 shields, which is easy to activate since this build is comfortably sitting around way over 1200 shields. Overall the Raksa Kubrow works extremely well as a supporting unit for this setup, but it does add overall cost to the build, which is why we also have the budget and early versions of this build as well. Now for the Archon Shards for the build, I haven't really added anything to it yet, as I only used one ability strength to just test it out, since this build already feels very solid. If you do want to use them though, I mainly recommend using the red Archon Shards for ability strength to actually boost your overall damage even more. You could also use the Emerald Archon Shards for the extra corrosive stacks, but since we are constantly stripping enemies armor with pillage, raw ability strength usually gives more value here, but this is up to you to decide. I personally don't really use Archon Shards in this build, but you could add some. And before we move on, I really appreciate some feedback in the comment sections on how this build focus format actually feels, especially since I don't usually make build videos like this, so let me know what worked, what didn't, and of course feel free to like and subscribe the video if you found this helpful. So now we are for the section of the budget build, which is for those who might not have the resources to fully invest in an endgame build for 11 FOMA, which is also quite a lot actually. This build is then a cheaper setup that doesn't fully require you to max out your FOMA across everything, but maybe one FOMA here and there. Even though it's cheaper, it still works fine on Steel Path, though you will get slightly less uptime in the Aegis Storm mode and you won't be able to see massive red crit here and there as you would in the endgame version. Overall, it is still strong enough to handle Steel Path content, though some changes have been made to reduce the capacity cost, so let's go over those for this build. For the budget Hildryn build, most of the setup stays the exact same. We have just adjusted some capacity heavy mods and arcanes, which are harder to obtain early on. Also, the build doesn't include the subsumed ability on Hildryn either. If you don't have the main arcanes or enough capacity, I recommend removing the Excellus mod slot and possibly not actually ranking your other mods up to the full while actually staying within the limits. If you don't have the core arcanes like Arcane Velocity, Arcane Expertise, just equip whatever you have to actually help you with your shields or ability strengths, for example the Arcane Aegis or the Mold Augmented, which could be fine to actually swap in here. Overall, Hildryn herself isn't too expensive in the overall build version, so here's not much of a change from the endgame to this setup as you see. For the Balefire Charger, the setup is mostly the same, but we will swap the expensive mod for regular versions, removing the Excellus slot to free up some capacity and adjusting the rankings where necessary. So if the capacity is still tight, simply don't max out your mod mods to save a bit more on it. We have also swapped the secondary Innervate for secondary Merciless if you don't have the Innervate Arcanes, which will be the cheaper option or the more easily to acquire option. Then for the Raksa Kubrow, the companion isn't really required, but it will make the build much more sustainable, so if you don't have this companion it doesn't really matter, but if you do, we will continue doing a budget and early version for this companion. In the budget version we could remove Animal Instinct to focus more on Protect and the Bond mods. You could also remove the Recharge depending on how much capacity you need, otherwise just adjust the mod strengths to actually fit your FOMA. And the most important mods are still going to be Protect, Delink and Redirection mods, basically anything that has to do with Protect and Shields. The other mods are more of a bonus or quality of life you could add on top of the build. In short, the budget version keeps the same core playstyle as the endgame build, but reduces the cost, letting you handle Steel Path content without actually investing all 10 plus FOMA in the build. The goal is basically to get as close as possible to the endgame version of the build while remaining accessible to players who don't yet have the rare mods, high FOMA or the Arcanes you actually need to make the full build. Where on the other hand, the early version of this build, which is a cheap and beginner friendly version as it gets, while still being effective in missions, and you can even still run this on Steel Path mode with the setup. It won't be as powerful as the budget or endgame version, but you can definitely hold your own solo in Steel Path still. This version changes quite a bit compared to the endgame build, no rare mods, no FOMA and only potatoes to boost the capacity. It is the perfect place to actually test out the build to see if you like it and decide if you want to invest further into a stronger version of the build. For Hildryn, the main focus on her is going to be Redirection, Continuity, Stretch and Aegis Gale and Intensify. The rest of the mod slots can be filled with whatever mods you actually want to. As seen here, I have used the Augur mods because they have some shield and bonus range on it. If you happen to have any extra mods to increase your shield capacity, range or ability strength, feel free to actually slot them in here on the free slots. Many of the good mods could be picked up from the Cetus bounties as I did with my build here or other places in the game. But don't worry if you don't have them, the build still works completely fine, and of course if you have Arcanes as well, go ahead and add the ones you actually have to just have some in the build as well. You actually don't need much here on Hildryn as the build mostly focuses on synergy and sustaining your Aegis Gale mode, the longer with a higher shield pool. And then for the Balefire Charger, we do remove some mods as you might not have gotten them yet, but if you have them, just add them to the build. And here we will then focus mostly on the early game players that can access these mods. We will be using the Barrel Diffusion, which is the core for multi-shot mods. If you don't have it, there's actually a flawed version that can be picked up at Iron Wake on Earth after completing the Chains of Harrow quest. And the rest of the mods are actually very early game mods that can drop just by playing the game, and it will still perform well enough for early game Steel Path content. For the companion, if you got lucky enough to actually have a Raksa Kubrow as one of your first companions, that's awesome, then you can actually use this on your build. You can then focus on your Protect, Hasten, Deflection and Link Redirection, plus of course getting a Fetch and Retriever mods to just have them as a nice bonus. And then you can fill the remaining slots with whatever helps your playstyle. If you don't have the Raksa Kubrow, just use any companion you have. The Raksa Kubrow is mostly just a quality of life for sustaining and actually isn't required to make the build work, but it will add some nice additions to the build, making it overall a little bit stronger. Overall, this is about as early and accessible as the build can get, yet it still performs in Steel Path, and of course you can always upgrade this early version of the build over time into the budget or endgame build, as you collect the mods, FOMA and Arcanes you need to actually finish up the build. Now this is my first build video and I might have rambled a bit about throughout the video, and I honestly wasn't sure what to keep or cut for this type of video, so hopefully it came out okay for the first try here. So if you want to see more build videos like this in the future, let me know down in the comment what I could improve on the structure or style of the video, and the format is pretty different from my usual Warframe guides, so your feedback would be super helpful to actually make this series work better. That should do it for this Tipsy Balefire build that can easily clear Steel Path content and can be quite a chill build, just hovering around enemies, killing anything in radius, and with quite a good amount of survivability and damage on top. So I hope you have found this video helpful, have gotten the information you came for, and be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, it really helps out a lot. And if you want to see more Warframe tips and tricks, you can also check out my other videos as well on the channel. We also do have a Discord server, so feel free to join it and become part of the community. And thanks again to the people supporting me over on the Patreon and here on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Stay tuned, stay tipsy, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.